The fake officer, a beefy guy with a face like a bulldog chewing a wasp, had just cuffed my hands behind my back. My Porsche, my beautiful custom-built 911 GT3 RS, was already being loaded onto a flatbed tow truck. "You have the right to remain silent," he sneered, clearly enjoying every second of my supposed humiliation. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." His partner, a woman with a severe ponytail and an even more severe scowl, was rifling through my glove compartment. I just stood there watching the scene unfold, a cold, hard knot of fury tightening in my gut. They thought they had me. They thought they'd won. They didn't know who they were messing with. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. My name is Alex, and until a few months ago, my life was well normal. Or as normal as it gets for a US Marshal. I'd spent 15 years chasing down fugitives, serving warrants, and generally putting bad guys behind bars. It's a job that keeps you on your toes, demands respect, and occasionally involves a high-speed chase or two. When I wasn't doing that, I was usually tinkering with my pride and joy. A guard's red Porsche 911 GT3 RS. It wasn't just a car. It was a sanctuary, a mechanical extension of myself, meticulously maintained and endlessly customized. It was my escape, my therapy, my one true indulgence. I'd finally found my slice of paradise in a quiet, upscale gated community called the Oaks. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and houses that looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. It was supposed to be a peaceful haven, a place where I could unwind, enjoy my weekends, and maybe, just maybe, finally get around to planting that herb garden I'd been dreaming about. I'm a pretty low-key guy when I'm not on the clock. I keep to myself, respect my neighbors, and mostly just want to be left alone. The trouble started subtly, like a faint whisper you almost dismiss as the wind. Mrs. Gable, or Karen, as I'd soon come to call her, lived 2 houses down. From day one, she seemed to take an unnatural interest in my life. I first noticed it when I was washing my car, my glorious guard's red Porsche. It was a Saturday morning, sun shining, birds chirping, the perfect day. I had my music on, a little classic rock, just loud enough to hear over the suds. Suddenly a shadow fell over me. "Is that a sports car?" A voice, sharp and nasal, cut through the air. I turned to see Mrs. Gable. Arms crossed, a disapproving frown etched on her face. She was a woman who seemed to be perpetually dressed for a church picnic. Even when just walking her miniature poodle, Precious, which, incidentally, barked at anything that moved. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, trying to be polite. "It's a Porsche," she repeated, drawing out the word like it was a curse. "In this neighborhood?" I just blinked. "Is there a problem?" "Well, it's rather ostentatious, wouldn't you say? And that color. It clashes terribly with the aesthetic of our community." She gestured vaguely at the tastefully neutral houses around us. I fought back a laugh. "It's red, Mrs. Gable. It's a classic Porsche color. Our covenants clearly state that all vehicles must blend harmoniously with the surroundings," she declared, puffing out her chest. "I'm sure the HOA would agree." That was my first introduction to Mrs. Gable and her unwavering belief that she was the self-appointed guardian of the Oaks aesthetics. I shrugged it off. Some people are just like that, I figured. Little did I know, this was just the overture to a full-blown opera of absurdity. A few weeks later, I received my first official HOA violation notice. Excessive vehicle noise. I looked at my Porsche. It was loud, yes, but it was a performance car. It had a sports exhaust. It wasn't a Harley-Davidson. I rarely revved it, and I was always careful when leaving early for work or coming home late. The notice cited a complaint from an anonymous resident. I had a pretty good idea who that anonymous resident was. I called the HOA office. "Look, my car isn't excessively loud," I explained to the perky, slightly overwhelmed secretary. "It's just the way the engine is designed." "Oh, Mr. Harding," she said, consulting her computer. "The complaint states it's disruptive, especially in the mornings." I glanced out my window directly at Mrs. Gable's house. Her blinds were usually open by 6 a.m., which was about when I left for my early shifts. It was clear as day. I felt a prickle of annoyance. This wasn't just about noise. It was about control. I tried to be reasonable. I even started parking my car further down my driveway, away from her house, hoping the extra distance would muffle the sound. It didn't work. The complaints kept coming. Improperly parked vehicle, even though it was entirely within my property lines. Unauthorized modifications to vehicle. Apparently my racing stripes were a breach of some unwritten rule. Each notice was more ridiculous than the last. Each one felt like it had Mrs. Gable's fingerprints all over it. One evening, I was grilling some steaks on my patio. The smell of charcoal and sizzling meat filled the air. It was a perfect summer evening. I was just about to flip a perfectly seared ribeye when I heard it. The distinct whine of Precious. Mrs. Gable's poodle, followed by Mrs. Gable's piercing shriek. "Mr. Harding, your smoke is polluting my air. My Precious is having an asthma attack." I looked over. Precious was doing her usual frantic yapping. Mrs. Gable was waving her hands dramatically, fanning the air around her dog. There was barely a wisp of smoke, and the wind was blowing it away from her house. "Mrs. Gable, I'm just grilling," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I have a sensitive respiratory system, and so does Precious. This is a violation of community health standards." She screeched, clutching her chest for added effect. I just stared at her. Community health standards? Was she serious? This woman was a force of nature, a Category 5 hurricane of petty grievances. I finished grilling, but the joy had gone out of my evening. I knew then that this wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was a mission. And I knew how to handle missions. The next few weeks were a slow, agonizing drip of minor skirmishes. Every time I mowed my lawn, she'd complain about grass clippings. If I left my trash cans out for an extra hour after collection, another notice. It was relentless. I felt like I was living under a microscope, every move scrutinized, every action deemed a breach of HOA decorum. The worst part was, she seemed to relish it. I'd catch her watching me from her window, a smug little smile on her face, when I picked up an HOA notice from my mailbox. I tried to ignore her, to rise above it, but it was chipping away at my peace of mind. This wasn't the tranquil retreat I'd envisioned. This was psychological warfare. And I, a U.S. Marshal, who had faced down armed criminals, was being driven to distraction by a woman obsessed with lawn gnomes and car colors. The irony wasn't lost on me. One Saturday morning I woke up to an even more audacious escalation. I walked outside to grab my newspaper, and there it was. A bright yellow notice of violation sticker plastered directly onto my Porsche's windshield. Not a ticket under the wiper, but a full-blown, adhesive-backed sticker. It screamed unauthorized vehicle in big, bold letters. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just petty anymore. This was personal. This was vandalism. I ripped the sticker off, leaving a sticky residue. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage that was simmering just beneath the surface. I looked directly at Mrs. Gable's house. Her curtains twitched. I knew she was watching. I knew she was enjoying this. I walked straight to the HOA office, the crumpled sticker in my hand. "Who authorized this?" I demanded, slamming the sticker on the counter. "This isn't just a violation. This is damaging my property." The same perky secretary, Sarah, looked genuinely distressed. "Oh, Mr. Harding, I'm so sorry," Mrs. Gable insisted. "She said it was the only way to get your attention," Mrs. Gable insisted. I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "So she has the authority to authorize vandalism now?" Sarah wrung her hands. "Well, she's on the Architectural Review Committee, and she claimed your vehicle was in violation of several aesthetic guidelines, and you weren't responding to written notices. So she said this was the next step," and I just stared at her. The Architectural Review Committee. Of course. She'd found her loophole, her little fiefdom of power. This was a whole new level of audacity. I walked out of that office fuming. I wasn't just annoyed anymore. I was actively formulating a plan. This woman needed to be put in her place, and I was just the person to do it. But I had to do it by the book, through official channels. One was a U.S. Marshal, after all. I knew how to navigate bureaucracy. Or so I thought. I spent the next few days meticulously documenting everything. Photos of my car time-stamped. Copies of all the violation notices. Emails to the HOA, none of which received a satisfactory response. I even got a sound meter and recorded my car's exhaust volume, proving it was within legal limits. I compiled a dossier, a fortress of facts. I was ready to present my case to the HOA board at their next meeting. I thought, surely, with undeniable evidence, they'll see how ridiculous this all is. The meeting was a disaster. Mrs. Gable was there, naturally perched at the front, looking like a vulture ready to pounce. She had brought a small army of her cronies, a gaggle of equally entitled residents who nodded vigorously at her every pronouncement when it was my turn. I laid out my case calmly, presenting my evidence, explaining how her complaints were baseless and, in some cases, outright fabrications. I even showed them the sticky residue on my windshield from the unauthorized vehicle sticker. This is harassment, I concluded, looking directly at the board members. And it needs to stop. Mrs. Gable practically vibrated in her seat. Mr. Harding, she began, her voice dripping with mock concern, is simply resistant to following community guidelines. His vehicle is a blight, an eyesore. And that noise? My precious has developed a nervous tic because of it. She held up her poodle, which yipped on cue. Her cronies murmured in agreement. The board members, a collection of older residents who seemed more interested in preserving their property values than in actual justice, looked uncomfortable. They hemmed and hawed. They suggested I consider a different color for my car. They suggested I get an aftermarket exhaust system that was quieter. They essentially sided with Mrs. Gable. I walked out of that meeting in a daze. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All my efforts, all my evidence, dismissed with a wave of a hand. It was clear Mrs. Gable had them wrapped around her little finger. She was the queen bee, and her word was law. I was alone in this fight. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a war, and I had underestimated my adversary. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew I had to escalate. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. The very next morning, things took a truly sinister turn. I woke up to a frantic banging on my front door. I grabbed my service weapon, a Glock 19, from my nightstand out of habit. Years of training kick in automatically. When you answer the door, you're always ready. I peered through the peephole. Standing on my porch were two individuals dressed in what looked like police uniforms. My heart rate immediately spiked. Something felt off. Their uniforms were a little too crisp, almost theatrical. The badges, though shiny, didn't look quite right. I'm a Marshal. I know what real cops look like. I opened the door, keeping a slight crack, my hand still on my weapon. Can I help you? U.S. Marshal Alex Harding? The beefy guy asked, his voice a gravelly growl. He was the one with the bulldog face, who's asking? I replied, my eyes scanning for identification. He flashed a badge, too quickly for me to get a good look, and said, We're from the Metropolitan Police Department. We have a warrant for your vehicle. It's been reported stolen. My blood ran cold. Stolen? My Porsche? This was beyond ridiculous. This was a blatant, outrageous lie. My mind raced. This had Mrs. Gable's stench all over it. She'd gone from petty complaints to filing a false police report. Or worse, she'd hired these clowns. Stolen? I scoffed, trying to buy time, trying to figure out their game. That's my car. I bought it new. We have a report from a Mrs. Penelope Gable. The female officer chimed in, her voice shrill. She claims you've been driving her stolen vehicle for months. I almost laughed. Penelope Gable, claiming my Porsche was hers. This was a new level of delusion. But the danger was real. These people, fake or not, were trying to steal my car. And they were pretending to be law enforcement. This was a federal offense. This was serious. I need to see that warrant, I said, my voice firm. And I need to see legitimate police identification. Bulldog face sneered. We don't need to show you anything, buddy. This is official police business. Either you cooperate, or we take you in for obstruction." He reached for his cuffs. That's when I knew. These were not real police officers. No legitimate officer would refuse to show proper ID or a warrant when challenged, especially not in such an aggressive, dismissive manner. They were trying to intimidate me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I pushed the door open, fully revealing myself. I was still in my pajamas, but my stance was authoritative, my eyes hard. "I am a U.S. Marshal," I stated, my voice cutting through the morning air. "And you two are impersonating police officers. That's a federal crime." Their bravado faltered for a split second. Bulldog Face's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The woman's ponytail seemed to droop. They hadn't expected that. They'd expected a civilian, someone easily intimidated. "Don't try to pull that, pal." Bulldog Face recovered quickly, trying to sound tough. "We're the cops here." "Oh, really?" I slowly reached into my pajama pocket and pulled out my official U.S. Marshal badge, holding it up for them to see. It glinted in the morning sun. Then, just as slowly, I pulled out my Marshal ID card, complete with my photo and federal government insignia. "Do either of you have anything that looks like this? Because if not, you're about to have a very bad day." The color drained from their faces. Bulldog Face visibly swallowed. The woman gasped. They suddenly looked less like confident officers, and more like two kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. The bravado completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate, panicked scramble. "Look, buddy, there's been a mistake," Bulldog Face stammered, backing away slowly. "We just got a tip." "We didn't know. A tip from who?" I pressed, my voice like ice. "A Mrs. Penelope Gable, perhaps?" They didn't answer. They just kept backing up, their eyes darting around, looking for an escape route. The tow truck driver, who had been leisurely hooking up my Porsche, paused, his head cocked, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics. "You're not going anywhere," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling this in. Impersonating federal law enforcement, attempted grand theft auto, filing a false police report. You two are looking at some serious jail time." Bulldog Face and his partner exchanged a terrified glance. Then, in a move that was both predictable and pathetic, they bolted. They sprinted to their unmarked sedan, which was actually just a beat-up Ford Crown Victoria, sped off down the street, tires squealing. They left my Porsche partially hooked up to the tow truck, and the tow truck driver scratching his head. I made the call. Within minutes, genuine police officers, along with some of my own colleagues from the Marshal's office, were swarming the Oaks. The fake officers were apprehended a few miles away, looking very much like criminals and very little like law enforcement. They quickly sang like canaries, implicating Mrs. Gable as the mastermind behind the whole ludicrous scheme. She had paid them a hefty sum to repossess my car, believing that by doing so, she could finally rid herself of the eyesore and noisy menace that was my Porsche. She even had a fake title she'd cooked up, attempting to claim ownership of my vehicle. The audacity was truly breathtaking. The real police. After a good laugh and a few bewildered stares at my guard's red beauty, started their investigation. And you know who was the first person they went to talk to? Mrs. Penelope Gable. I watched from my front porch as two patrol cars pulled up to her meticulously manicured lawn. The officers, looking grim, knocked on her door. I could hear her shrill voice even from my house, protesting, denying, probably blaming me. But this time, her protests fell on deaf ears. She was led out in handcuffs, still in her church picnic attire, her face a mask of disbelief and outrage. Precious, her poodle, yipped frantically from inside the house. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the sticker on my windshield. The baseless complaints, the manufactured drama, and the sheer audacity of trying to steal my property, and the feeling quickly passed. The aftermath was glorious. Mrs. Gable was charged with multiple felonies, including conspiracy to commit grand theft, impersonating an officer by proxy, and filing a false police report. Her reign of terror over the Oaks was officially over. The HOA board, suddenly finding their spine, swiftly removed her from the architectural review committee, and issued a formal apology to me. My Porsche, thankfully, was unharmed, though it did require a good wash to get rid of the tow truck grease. The neighborhood, which had mostly stayed silent during Mrs. Gable's reign, suddenly found its voice. Neighbors who had quietly suffered her petty tyranny came out of the woodwork, sharing their own horror stories, expressing their relief. I even got a few apologies from people who admitted they should have spoken up sooner. It turned out I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. I was just the one who finally fought back. The whole ordeal taught me a few things. First, never underestimate the power of a truly determined Karen. Second, sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with guns and badges, but with patience and a firm resolve. And third, even in the quietest, most seemingly peaceful communities, there can be a viper lurking in the hedges, ready to strike. My life in the Oaks is a lot quieter now. My Porsche gleams in the driveway, no longer a target of unwarranted scrutiny. I still get the occasional curious glance, but now it's usually accompanied by a friendly wave or a compliment. I even planted that herb garden. It's thriving. But every now and then, when I'm out for a drive, enjoying the rumble of my engine, I see a new face in the neighborhood, someone new moving in. And I can't help but wonder, what new challenges might the quiet streets of the Oaks bring next? After all, you can never truly escape the drama of an HOA.